Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me. Today, we are returning to Fallout 76, where we will be spending another 1000 scrip on 3-star ranged legendary weapons, and as always, I'll take a few moments to speak about each weapon, about what makes it good, bad, or indifferent. Remember, if you enjoy content like this, please be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps the channel out and it doesn't cost you a penny. Before we get started, I would like to apologize for missing last week's script video and being late on this week's script video. I had two members of my family in the hospital over the past week and a half, and all of that time was pretty much spent working and spending my time at the hospital and sleeping where I could. So that's why I missed out on these videos. But as of the time I'm recording this, they are both home and doing well, and things are getting back to normal. And this is the first time that I've actually logged into Fallout 76 since all of that began. But let me go on ahead and get started here, so here we go. So for our first 3-star ranged legendary weapon today, we get a Mutant Slayer's Short Assault Rifle, with the last round in the magazine having a 25% chance to deal double damage and +1 perception. So the assault rifle is not one of the most desirable weapons out there, but I do believe it's better than most people give it credit for. Its damage is lower than the handmade and the fixer and even the combat rifle, which is why it's not particularly appreciated, but it fires very smoothly, and overall it's a fun weapon to use. And its damage being a little bit lower is not that much of an issue. You can generally just put an extra round, maybe two, into an enemy and they'll go down, but I can understand why most players prefer the more damage per shot. Overall, though, the assault rifle is a bit underrated in my opinion. The plus 50% damage to super mutants effect on it, that is one of the Slayer's effects, and it's probably one of the better Slayer's effects because there are a number of situations where you know you're going to be going and hunting super mutants, so if you're going to keep a weapon around specifically for it, it would make a lot of sense to do it for the super mutants. Their daily ops that include super mutants. If you're grinding experience, you're likely to be hitting West Tech or some of the other super mutant locations, so overall, it's one of the better effects as far as the Slayer's effects go. The second effect, the last round in a magazine having 25% chance to deal double damage, well, if you've watched any of my script videos in the past, you know that I am not a fan of this effect. The 25% chance is just way too low. But beyond that, many players, myself included, when running non-core based weapons such as fusion cores and plasma cores and such, typically reload whenever you have a break in the fighting that's not going to affect you, so that way that you'll have a full clip when you run into your next group of enemies. And that's a pretty smart thing to do in my opinion. If you're doing that, however, then that 25% chance to deal double damage on the last round drops to 0% chance because you're not generally even firing the last round. So overall, it's like not having a second legendary effect at all. The third effect, +1 perception, that is pretty good. On a weapon like this, it's probably more useful than on some because the primary benefit of getting +1 perception is some more VATS accuracy. And if you're using a weapon like this, there's a very good chance that you're using it in VATS to get some extra crit damage out of it. So getting some more accuracy with that is never a bad thing. Overall, this one's not super exciting. It's not the worst around. I could see a mid-level player who hasn't gotten a good stock of legendary weapons using it for a while, but it's probably not going to be exciting for a high-level player. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. Here we get a Zealot's Cryolator with 25% plus 25% damage while aiming and 15% faster reload. So the Cryolator is a weapon, it's kind of a specialty weapon. It's not really the kind of weapon you're going to run around with as your main weapon typically, for most players anyway, because its damage is not especially high, and its primary benefit is that it slows down creatures. So that makes it good for bosses like the Scorchbeast Queen or Earl, or even potentially the Imposter Sheepsquatch. But in that case, the Zealot's effect is actually pretty good because you're getting some extra damage if you're using it at a Scorchbeast Queen fight. So that's not the worst thing ever. The Zealot's effect overall is probably one of the more useful of the Slayer's effects just because there are definite times when you're going to be fighting Scorch, such as the Scorch Beast Queen fights. Generally speaking, if you're hunting Scorched, you don't need that extra plus 50% damage on most weapons just because they're pretty squishy to begin with. But getting that plus 50% damage when you're fighting the Scorch Beast Queen or even just regular Scorch Beast could be a benefit. The plus 25% damage while aiming, that makes this one even better for facing off with something like the Scorch Beast Queen, just because you're going to get actually plus 75% damage if you happen to be free aiming, which a weapon like this is going to eat up your AP pretty quickly if you're using it in VATS, so I don't think most players are going to be using it in VATS. So the 25% damage while aiming is a very good effect for this weapon. And then of course the 15% faster reload, that's great on pretty much any weapon at all. So improving the speed of your reload improves your DPS, and that just makes things better. Overall, this one is not the most exciting. I would say that a quad cryolator would be preferable to a Zealots or really any other effect, just because that way you can keep firing for longer and keep the enemy frozen longer. But as far as non-quad goes, this is actually a pretty good cryolator for taking to, say, a Scorch Beast Queen fight. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one and see what we get. And here we've got an anti-armor short pump action shotgun with bashing damage increased by 50% and plus 250 damage resistance while reloading. So this pump action shotgun is, in my opinion, generally speaking, not one of the better shotguns. Largely because it does not have any ability to gain any armor penetration. It does not have a magazine mods available to it to gain that, and shotguns do not have any perks to give you any armor penetration. That means that the anti-armor legendary effect on this is actually pretty good because it's actually compensating for that weakness. So that actually is pretty good on this, not to mention the fact that when you fire a shotgun it shoots 8 pellets, and each of those pellets is going to be reduced, the damage that it does is going to be reduced by the target's armor. So being able to reduce the armor, reduce the armor so that you can get more of that damage through is going to be a very good thing. And higher damage is going to penetrate armor more easily than lower damage, which means that when you're dividing your damage up amongst 8 pellets, it's going to be affected by the armor even more so. So that makes the anti-armor very good on a weapon like this, which is actually very good effect normally anyway. The second effect, the bashing damage increased by 50%, well, that's pretty much not doing a whole lot for you. If you really spec, you might be able to get some half-decent bashing damage without using a minigun with a shredder mod, but overall, if you're going to want to be doing anything significant with bashing, you're going to want a minigun with a shredder mod. On anything else, the bashing damage increased by 50% is pretty unexciting. It's not really doing much, you're not doing much damage to begin with, so adding 50% of that is really not doing much. The 250 damage resistance while reloading, it's not the worst effect, but most players are going to be running around with armor at least in the, 300 to 400 range, at least in endgame. And once you've got armor with that level of protection, the plus 250 damage resistance is not going to be doing a whole lot. It will do something, don't misunderstand me, but you will start seeing diminishing returns after about 300 to 400 points of damage resistance. On the other hand, getting that damage resistance while you're reloading, which is a time when you're vulnerable, is a good thing. So it's not my favorite 3rd star by any means, but it's not worthless also. So overall, I'd call this one, to my mind, it's a glorified 1-star anti-armor, but it's not terrible. I could again see a lower level player using it until they got their hands on something better. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got an Assassin's Black Powder Pistol with replenishing action points with each kill and 90% reduced weight. So the black powder weapons are honestly difficult to use in this game unless you're glitching them, which I don't endorse by any means. I believe in playing the game straight. So with that in mind, you're basically going to be firing one shot and then spending several seconds, it feels like a really long time, reloading your black powder weapon, whether it be a pistol or a rifle, before you can fire it again. So it does do a lot of damage and has a very good chance of being able to take enemies down in one hit, which is what you really need with a weapon like this. But overall, it might be useful for, say, opening a fight and then switching to something faster when the fight gets going, or maybe if you're, at an event or something where there's other players around. But overall, I don't find the black powder weapons to be all that useful. The assassin's effect on them can be useful because you really do want to get those one-hit kills with the black powder weapons to make them at all useful. And the plus 50% damage to humans will help you do that with humans. But then again, humans in this game tend to be pretty squishy to begin with, so there's a good chance that, especially if you're using VATS to target a weak point, namely the head on the humans, then you're probably going to frequently be one-shotting killing them even without the assassin's effect. The replenishing action points with each kill, I think it's kind of lost on a weapon like this, because you're going to be firing one shot and then having to reload. So if you're staying in VATS that whole time, then yes, your AP pool will be continuing to deplete the whole time that you're reloading. But the smarter way to play that, if you're going to be using VATS with a weapon like this, would be to go into VATS, take your shot. If it happens to not kill the enemy, drop back out of VATS while you're reloading the weapon, and then go back into VATS to retarget once you're ready to fire again. So if you do it that way, then your action points will actually be replenishing anytime that you're reloading. And with that in mind, you're not likely to run out of AP on a weapon like this just because it fires so slowly. So the replenishing action points with each kill is probably not going to do a whole lot for you on a weapon like this. 90% reduced weight, that's good on pretty much any weapon, and there's not a whole lot of mods for the black powder pistol, so it's going to do more for you on this than it would on a lot of other weapons, just because, if you'll remember, the mods that you apply to a weapon do not benefit from the 90% reduced weight legendary effect. So that's a good thing, and the fact that it's an Assassin's Slayer's effect means that you could consider carrying a weapon like this around just to fight humans, and it's not going to take up a whole bunch of weight in your inventory. The ammo for it, on the other hand, could, but because it fires so slow, you wouldn't necessarily need to carry a ton of that ammo. So overall, this is a pretty unexciting piece. Let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got a Mutant's Cryolator with plus 50% limb damage and plus 50 damage resistance while aiming. So I talked about the Cryolator earlier. The Mutant's effect got a buff recently when they rebalanced the legendary effects. It used to be a straight 10% increase to damage if you had one mutation or more. Now it's an increase in damage by 5% for each mutation, up to a maximum of 5 mutations for a maximum of 25% bonus damage. That is not bad, because many players, in fact, in my experience, most high-level players will be running probably at least close to 5, if not 5 mutations, by the time you factor in Marsupial, Speed Demon, either Herbivore or Carnivore, and, any other mutations that are worthwhile to your specific build. It's basically like getting an extra 25% damage for really no sacrifice whatsoever. On the other hand, the 25% damage is rather low compared to things like Junkies 50% damage, or Aristocrats 50% damage, or of course Bloodied, or even Anti-Armor. So overall, I'm not a huge fan of mutants, but it's not terrible. The plus 50% limb damage, on a weapon like this, it might actually be pretty useful, because you're largely going to be using this on boss fights, and being able to cripple the limbs on some bosses, especially if you're freezing them in the process, could be a useful thing. So I'd actually have to try it out to see how useful it is on this weapon. On most weapons, I don't find it all that useful, but it may be pretty good here. The plus 50 damage resistance while aiming, that's probably more useful than the plus 250 damage resistance while reloading, just because you're likely to be aiming a weapon more frequently than you're reloading it. On the other hand, you are vulnerable while you're reloading, so getting the extra damage resistance while reloading could be a better time to get it. Overall, I'm not really a huge fan of either of those effects, but they're not the worst around, and they do what they say on the box. So anyway, let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we have a Gourmand's Gatling Laser with plus 50% limb damage and faster movement speed while aiming. So the Gatling Laser is not especially exciting. The Ultrasight Gatling Laser is significantly better as if you're interested in running a fusion core based weapon, and it can be useful just because there's a perk under intelligence that lets you double the use or the length of time that you can use fusions cores. So that means you can get double ammo out of either a Gatling laser or an ultrasight Gatling laser, which is a pretty good thing. Plus, these things fire incredibly fast. So while the Gatling laser is definitely not as good as the ultrasight Gatling laser, it's not absolutely terrible. The Gourmand's effect is not one of my favorite effects at all. In fact, I'm pretty unexcited by it. It gives you plus 12% damage bonus for having your thirst meter full, and another plus 12% for having your hunger meter full, for a maximum of 24% damage. The 24% is a bit low, like I mentioned under the mutants effect, but it's in line with some of the other effects, so that's not the issue so much as the fact that no matter how diligent you are about keeping your character well hydrated and well fed, unless you're constantly using perfect bubblegum or something like that, your hunger and thirst meter will deplete, which means that your extra damage from the Gourmand's effect will decrease as well. So overall, I find that a bit unexciting. The plus 50% limb damage, as I mentioned on the previous weapon, I find that generally pretty unexciting, although on a faster firing weapon with lower damage, it is more useful just because you're going to be putting a lot of shots on the enemy, so you got a lot more chances to cripple a limb, and it's probably going to take you a little bit longer to kill them just because you have to put more shots on them, so being able to cripple a limb may help keep you out of danger. So again, not my favorite effect, but I could see it having some use on a weapon like this. The faster movement speed while aiming, in my opinion, is pretty much a worthless effect. If you are running the Speed Demon mutation, which I believe most high-level players will be running, then it's doing effectively nothing for you. If you're not running that mutation, then it will be doing something for you, but the question is, how frequently are you really running around the battlefield while aiming? Sure, it may happen sometimes, but I personally don't do a whole lot of that, and I suspect a lot of other players don't as well. If you are the type of player who does that, then that effect may be very good for you, again, if you don't have the Speed Demon mutation. So anyway, this one's pretty much a dud. Let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got a Furious 10mm pistol with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and plus 1 agility. So the 10mm pistol is pretty much the premier weapon for guerrilla builds. There are a few other options, but in general, the 10mm is going to be the best weapon currently available for guerrilla builds. It's also one of the better weapons available for gunslinger builds. The Furious effect is going to work a lot better with Guerrilla, the fully automatic pistols, just because basically the way it works is each subsequent hit after the first on the target increases the damage by 5%. So the first shot does 0% extra damage, the second shot on the same target does plus 5%, then plus 10% for the third, and so on, until you either get, I don't remember if it's 45 or 50% at the 9th or 10th shot, but you're going to have to put several shots on the target before you start seeing significant benefits from the Furious effect. So you really want a faster firing weapon to be able to take advantage of that, which if you modify this thing to be automatic, it does fit that bill. It's not the best effect for a weapon like this. It would be much better on a weapon like the Ultrasight Gatling laser, for example, that has just an incredible fire rate. But overall, it's serviceable on a weapon like this, at least. The VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage is very good on a weapon like this. If you're running pistols, whether it be a guerrilla or gunslinger, there's a very good chance you're going to be using VATS heavily to get some extra damage out of those VATS critical shots. And getting some extra damage from that with the secondary effect of plus 50% damage on VATS critical hits, that's going to do even better for you. So overall, that's a very good effect on this weapon. The plus 1 agility, that's going to give you some more AP, which is going to help keep you going in VATS even longer. So overall, this one's pretty mediocre, but again, I could see a lower level player using a weapon like this, at least until they got a hold of something better. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. And here we have a Mutant's Railway Rifle with replenishing action points with each kill and plus 50 damage resistance while aiming. So the Railway Rifle is one of the strongest commando weapons or rifleman weapons in the game, as long as you don't want to suppress it. There is no suppressor for it, but if you just want to run and gun, this is a very good rifle for that. The Mutant's effect is probably not the best effect for a weapon like this. If you're going to be running it as a rifleman, then something like Bloodied or Anti-Armor or Aristocrats or Junkies is probably your best effects, just so you can maximize the damage per shot. If you're going to run it as a commando build, fully automatic, then you're probably best off with Quad, because it only has a 10-round magazine, which is going to go very, very quickly if you are firing fully automatic. The replenishing action points with each kill, that could be pretty good on a weapon like this, but overall, it's not the most exciting second effect, just because the AP cost of the Railway Rifle is actually surprisingly low to begin with, so you can actually fire for a long time with a decent amount of AP before you run out. So, still, being able to use this weapon in VATS and get some more AP back every time you kill something, that is a good thing, and it will keep you running in VATS and getting that extra critical damage frequently. So that's a good thing. And then the plus 50 damage resistance while aiming, well, I talked about that before, but here it also has a bit of a drawback in that it does not synergize well with the replenishing action points with each kill, because if you're aiming, you're not using VATS, and if you're using VATS, then you're not aiming. So while there is something to be said for having a weapon with some diversity where you can use it either way and get a benefit, my opinion is that you're better off using a weapon that you're going to use one way or the other with effects that synergize well together. And if you want to use different weapon, or if you want to play in different playstyles, switch weapons when you want to aim switch between your weapons when you want to aim versus when you want to use VATS. But, play it how you would like. That's the way the game is best done. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one here. And here we've got a Stalker's Tesla rifle with plus 25% damage while aiming and 90% reduced weight. So the Tesla rifle is an interesting weapon. It is great for crowd control. It's also, I find it particularly useful for the daily ops where the enemies are invisible, because you can just kind of fire in a general area, bounce it off a wall, and figure out very quickly whether there's any enemies there or not. If you turn on the damage numbers through your options menu, then as soon as you start seeing numbers, you know there's an enemy there. The Stalker's effect, on the other hand, is not really interesting at all. I'm not even sure that it actually does what it says on the box. I've done a little bit of testing with it myself, and I don't see where it guarantees a hit. It does seem to cost the extra AP, 50% AP cost on the shots when you're outside of combat, but I'm not seeing where it actually guarantees that plus 100% VATS hit chance. So overall, I don't see where it's really doing anything at all, making it, in my opinion, probably the worst first star effect for ranged legendary weapons in the game at this point. The plus 25% damage while aiming, that's pretty good, because most players, myself included, are not using Tesla rifles in VATS. You're frequently just going to be hip firing them, but if you got this effect on the weapon, then getting plus 25% damage just for aiming down the sights, that's not a terrible thing at all. So I could see that being useful. And the 90% reduced weight, well, a Tesla rifle is not the kind of weapon that you're typically gonna main. You're gonna use it more in situations where you find it useful. Maybe, like I say, the daily ops with invisible enemies. Maybe when you're being swarm, maybe in some PvP or whatever. So the 90% reduced weight, that's going to help you carry it around, and there's not a ton of mods for the Tesla rifle, so it's not going to lose a lot of that benefit, and allows you to carry it around without taking up a ton of inventory space. So overall, the second and the third stars on this one are good, but the first star makes it pretty much a loser in my opinion. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. In fact, I believe this is the last one. And here we've got a Troubleshooter's Railway Rifle with plus 50% damage to robots, VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, and plus 1 agility. So I talked a little bit about the Railway Rifle before. Everything that I mentioned there applies here. The Troubleshooter's effect is another one of the Slayer's effects. And it's potentially even the most useful of the Slayer's effects. There are a number of situations where you know you will be fighting robots. Anytime you're running a nuke silo, anytime you've got a daily op with robots in them, if you go to do the Imposter Sheep Squatch event, and so on. So, getting plus 50% damage to robots, which are not always the squishiest of enemies to begin with, is actually a pretty significant bonus there. The VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, if you're using the Railway Rifle in VATS, that's going to be a very good thing, and it's got a very high base damage to begin with, so being able to get some extra damage from the VATS critical and then having that VATS critical damage increased even further is going to make the thing hit hard. So this is a pretty good weapon in that regard. And then the plus 1 agility synergizes well with the second star because it gives you some more AP to keep you running in VATS. So overall, it's not the best railway rifle by any means, but as railway rifles go, it is a pretty solid weapon there, and one that you could keep around specifically for running and gunning in the nuke silos or daily ops with robots or whatever. So anyway, we didn't get anything super exciting this week, but we'll try again next week, and hopefully we'll do better then. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you soon.